When a new Final Fantasy XIV expansion launches, the star of the show is the main story quest, the MSQ. It draws all the attention, for good or ill, all the opinions and critiques. But with the MSQ also come two separate quest lines, their purpose usually to complement the main story and to give you a deeper understanding of the people living in the expansion's lands and their cultures and troubles, as well as take trips to the regions seen in past expansions, to remind players that these old places haven't been forgotten. Both of these together help the world feel alive, lived in. One of these storylines is the one the role quests revolve around, a core storyline with 5 individual tales for the Disciples of War: tank, healer, magic DPS, ranged physical DPS, and melee physical DPS. The other storyline is reserved for the other side of the job system, the Disciples of the Hand and Land, the Crafters and Gatherers. Much like the role quests, you have individual tales, one for Alchemy or Culinarian, one for Miner or Botanist, one for Fisher, one for Leatherworker, Tailor or Carpenter, and the last one for Blacksmith, Armor or Goldsmith, with the player being free to use any of the applicable jobs to complete the quest, providing a good alternative for leveling these jobs before other means become available, such as collectibles. But how do these new storylines stack up? Do they rise to the occasion and deliver compelling stories, or do they falter? That's what I want to talk about today. Their highs, their lows, and the things I wish they had done differently. Let's start with the role quests, and both for these and deliveries, feel free to jump to the chapter of your choice. Now, the role quests in the previous 2 expansions, Shadowbringers and Endwalker, complemented the story of the MSQ. They added additional details to the quest we embarked on, while also filling in the gaps the main storyline quest leaves in terms of the culture and history of the different areas we visit. In Shadowbringers, we're tasked with helping a group of warriors of different inclinations deal with a set of unique Sin Eaters, the monsters of light that are the bane of the people living in the first. The Sin Eaters turn out to be the embodiments or maybe remnants of this world's warriors of light, who we met in a previous expansion as the Warriors of Darkness, and so we dispatch some dangerous creatures, make new friends, and learn of the history of these tragic heroes. In Endwalker, the leaders of the different nations request our aid in fighting the Blasphemies, the monsters of despair that come with the final days, which have spread across Eorzea. The Blasphemies have deep connections to the history of the kingdoms of Eorzea, be it to one of their leaders, such as the tank story Blasphemy being a childhood friend of Gridania's leader Canesena, or born of the age-old conflict with other tribes, such as the melee questline which involves Limsa Lominsa and the Sahuagin. But Dawntrail is different. The core of this expansion is a new adventure, a new beginning, and as I said in my previous video covering the MSQ, a very big thing for this expansion is experimentation, aka throwing things at the wall and see how well they stick, and so the role questline reflects that. How? By not having a single thing to do with the main story questline. Having said so, the role quests do have a connection with the theme of the expansion. By that I mean, if we see it in the way the press releases and Yoshi P and his team talked about Dawntrail before its release, then the expansion is about us going to a new land, XRal, and finding adventure and perils. So the role quests are the mirror of this, and has the people of XRal traveling to other places to find adventure and peril, with us supporting them and throwing a bit of our weight around for their benefit. The XRali we're tasked to help are very much fishes out of water, and while the Warrior of Light is just starting to create a reputation in Tuliolal, we have a very established presence in our older hangouts, so who better to lend a hand? In terms of the overall story, the role quests revolve around the antics of the Passage of the Unbound, an international organization of ne'er-do-wells. Their aim being to spread chaos around the world, destabilize nations, topple governments, turn friend to foe, and other evil deeds. The problem is, from their introduction, in which the different members are seen discussing their evil plot in the middle of Shibalaftier, the taco place, with an earshot of the staff, it's clear that these aren't a dark group with hands in all the pies like the Askins used to be. They're not a dark force, no, they're Team Rocket, Saturday morning cartoon villains. So what has the Passage of the Unbound done for us to step in? Well, it seems in XRal there are a set of artifacts housing the powers of different XRal Vidral. For those who need a quick refresher, a XRal Vidral is a beast that has lived for more than a century and thus gained superpowers. Paligarmanda is very much an extreme version of those. Each of these artifacts belong to different villages and tribes in XRal and are either kept enshrined or actively used to keep their people safe. The members of the passage, through various guises, manipulations, and outright deception, have stolen some of these items and taken them across the salt to Ishgard, Vanosia, Hugane and Doma, Alamigo, and Thafnir. But one thing that is consistent, and you're made aware of it early in each tale, is that the different agents of the Passage of the Unbound aren't really interested in the whole organization's goals. Instead, they're in these places for their own ambition. Are they being manipulated, or is the Passage of the Unbound a complete joke? I suppose we'll have to wait until the final quests, which will release in some time to learn the full truth. But for now, let's go over the different quests. The tank questline takes us to Ishgard and deals with the artifact known as the Cradle of the Sleepless, stolen by a disgraced temple knight dubbed Leofine the Unchivalrous. In her time in the knightly order, she liked to drink and party and avoid her duties, but her real moment of shame came when she fell asleep on duty and it led to the death of her charges, for which she was expelled and stripped of her title of nobility. She disappeared after that. On the other side are Tentoawa and Loazenique, current wide-eye and shut-eye of their village. At first glance, the cradle seems to have the power to put people to sleep, but the truth is that it drains the person of vitality and gives it to the wielder, the result being that the victim falls asleep and the user gains a measure of strength and remains wide awake. Thus the roles of wide-eye and shut-eye, one to stay awake and the other to give their vitality to the other. Tentoawa has been the wide-eye for the past 10 years, with Loazenique, his childhood friend and romantic interest, spending the majority of that time asleep, waking only to move and avoid muscle atrophy and to feed on occasion, and to get blasted by the artifact when it's time for Tentoawa to recharge. And if you're thinking, wow, that sounds messed up, then you're right. I think the nature of that custom and the impact on their relationship is the best aspect of the story. Theirs is a village that fears and distrusts all their neighbors, which comes from a time of hardship, where resources were scarce for everybody and the village had to look out for itself. But the village continued this tradition to the present, using the wide eye as a deterrent. The nature of their relationship, wanting to be together but forced apart by circumstance, reminded me so much of a movie from the 80s called Ladyhawke, a phenomenal medieval fantasy romance story that everyone should watch, but one where the protagonists are lovers kept apart by a curse. During the day, she is a hawk, and during the night, he is a wolf. Tentoawa and Loazenique can only meet for moments when he has to use the artifact to remain awake and put her to sleep. But during this tale, the theft of the artifact means that Tentoawa's sleep time is coming. And though Loazenique sends us to him from XRal, she makes the trip as well, and they reunite and come to realize they don't want to go back to the way things were. They don't want to be separate again. Which brings us to Leofine. Her goal is to disgrace the Temple Knights, putting members of the Order to sleep and thus force them into the same situation that saw her downfall. More than that, she learns that Ishgard is in the process of strengthening their relationship with the Vanu of the Sea of Clouds, so her ultimate goal is to cause irreparable damage there and fully ruin the reputation of the Ishgardian Knights. She is ultimately defeated with the help of the Vanu, who learn of what's going on and don't rise to Leofine's provocation, instead choosing to trust the Ishgardians and fight at their side against this common enemy. In the end, she falls into the abyss, her griffin mount jumping after her to maybe save her? Her fate is uncertain. But her intent leads Tentoawa and Loazenique to see what is possible when different cultures and peoples work together, instead of letting fear and mistrust guide them. And so they make the decision that when they return home, they're gonna change things. No more wide-eye and shut-eye, but take the first step to connect with their neighbors. Leofine is one of the better members of the Unbound. She's got a clear motive of vengeance. She feels wronged and wants the Ishgardians to suffer the same fate she did. It's clear her fall is of her own doing, but she's incapable of holding herself accountable to accept responsibility. After all, in the story, we learn that shirking duty and responsibility is what she's always done, be it the burdens of nobility or the duties of a knight, which is why in her background she wasn't partying all the time, just focusing on her own satisfaction. And her vengeance is just more of the same. It's self-indulgent. She's a deeply flawed character, and I like that. It's got potential for more. Not to mention that her plans are one of the few with actual chances of succeeding and causing an impact. Just imagine the consequences of Ishgard and its allies thinking that the Temple Knights are either untrustworthy, callous, or just plain incompetent. It would fray a lot of bonds and even civil order. It was a dangerous game that Leofine was playing. As Monty Python would say, now for something completely different. The healer questline takes us to Lim Salominsa first, and then across La Nocia, up to and including Costa del Sol and Brayflox's place. Two villains from the Passage of the Unbound, Elaret the Poisoner and Kokonowa the Mammoth Maker, intend to use the Heartstring, an artifact capable of both creating and dispelling toxins to spread new and interesting poisons all over La Nocia. Yeah, that's their ultimate goal. Elaret was shunned for her adoration of poisons, and so she's committed to indulging in poisoning everyone she can. And slightly obsessed with the Heartstring, she opts to subject people to her creations to see just how far she can take the artifact and what kind of effect she can create. Kokonowa uses his mammoths to help spread the toxins. Through this story I learned, because I don't remember it coming up before, that the Dunes folk Lalafell take in poisons of different kinds as part of their diet to gain a measure of resistance to toxins to deal with the flora and fauna of their home. Kokonowa thus doesn't need antidotes for Elaret's work and is even her willing test subject for some of them. He is fiercely loyal to her and just seems to want to indulge her desires. Our charge in this questline is Luashkana. Her people live surrounded by venomous creatures and they depend on the Heartstring to protect and cure their warriors and hunters. She's deeply horrified by Elaret's actions, as she's known the relic far more for its healing properties than for causing damage. But without it in her hands, she depends on Arisuna to do the work, and that interference in turn pushes Elaret further, her aim being to create a poison that will be resistant to Izuna and other healing effects. But Elaret and Kokonowa's actions in the end are just too random, and despite the need for Izuna to heal people and stop Elaret's experiments, the toxins she was using did not cause any permanent injury, which is something she says herself when she requests that we stop getting in the way. Elaret comes across as childish, and her efforts ultimately pointless. But I will give this story and Elaret props for one thing, and it's something that strikes Luashkana as odd as well. Elaret creates a toxin that causes effects similar to inebriation to a group of people, and Luashkana comments that there is no creature in their homeland with a venom with such characteristics, meaning that the powers of the Heartstring and potentially of every other Tural Vidral artifact have room for growth and evolution, and that may come into play during the final questline. At least I hope so. It will be this story's only saving grace. Luashkana is fascinated when she learns of the Dunes folk poisonous diet and thinks her people may need to consider something like that instead of depending so much on the Heartstring, and wants to bring that knowledge home with her. The healer questline is the one that feels the most like a cartoon villain's plan. Elaret and Kokonowa are truly Team Rocket, completely ineffective. The ranged DPS questline has, hands down, my least favorite of the guest characters. Her name is Sitolja, and there is another Mamulja called Kakulja. He's not much better, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The story takes us to Alamingo, where Shaltafeet Cravenscreed, what a name, is using the Steelhawk vessel to create a shield around his bandits and make them invulnerable to attacks, and to repel anyone who gets too close. The artifact not only provides protection, but the barrier creates a shockwave when dispelled. Shaltafit found people in Ul'dah and other places, workers, merchants, and artisans who felt abused and exploited, and promised them a better life, and then forced them to join in his attacks on Alamigan merchant caravans, then slowly showing his true colors and then keeping them all under his thumb through intimidation. His ultimate goal to topple the Alamigan government, and though he says it's to bring down tyrants, it's clear he just wants the power for himself. Helping him in this endeavor is Kakulja, a Mamulja mercenary who's staying with Shaltafit out of gratitude for helping him in the past and for a promise of future help in returning home to XRal. Shaltafit's villainous arc is great, because he's a textbook cult leader, preying on the weak and dispossessed, and through promises and lies, bringing them into the fold, and then preventing them from leaving through force or fear. He's great in that regard. My problem is the Mamulja. Sitolja and Kakulja are naive to the point of blatant stupidity. Sitolja I can understand, she's not a warrior, she's not a caster, she's just a villager, and she wants the artifact back as it protects the warriors from harm. But she pretty much believes anything anyone tells her, takes everything at face value. Kakulja is even worse. It turns out that Shaltafit convinced him that a ticket to XRal was prohibitively expensive and that in the future he would help the Mamulja earn passage back home. A lie he could have seen through had he asked just about anyone. Again, Sitolja is a villager, but we know from lore that Mamulja travel across the Salt as mercenaries, and mercenaries generally aren't the most trusting people, at least not this trusting. Hell, his illusions are shattered by Sitolja telling him that it's a lie, and that she knows a captain in Limsa that can help him go back, but there's no evidence of that being true. But he takes her word for it at face value, and then does a face turn and joins you against the former ally. But with all that said, I like the two merchants we meet with Shaltafit as they show the perspective of the disillusioned cultist. They remark how they feel indebted to Shaltafit for giving them a sense of new hope and a dream, but they don't want any part in his antics anymore and want to make amends and ultimately step aside, escaping from a bad situation. But this questline has another problem, that being the way to counter Shaltafit's artifact doesn't really relate to you being a ranged DPS. With the tank storyline, Leofine is empowered by the vitality she's taken, so your allies need someone who can shrug off big hits, hence a tank. On the healer side, Esuna is the key. In this arc, on the other hand, I expected it to be a case where you need to shoot the item out of the bad guy's hands before he can use it, or something like that, or maybe being close to the shield when it pops as a death sentence. But neither of those is true. The shockwave is just a knockback effect, and the way you deal with the Steelhawk vessel is by dealing enough damage to the shield to break it. And you're telling me that the Alamigans were having problems with this guy? Seriously? They fought off the Garleans! They would have curb-stomped this pretentious fool and his magic shield. They have more than enough people and weaponry to make it happen. In fact, come to think of it, the ranged physical DPS and the magical DPS villain could have been swapped and it would have been better. Though that's not to say I didn't enjoy the magical DPS questline. Speaking of which, this story takes us to Thafnir, in pursuit of the Perch of the Apex, which according to legend, can bring fortune to its wielder and misfortune to those around, which makes it sound like it has something to do with luck. Nope. It's merely an artifact that when the user feels threatened, it will take rocks from the surrounding area and drop them on the user's enemies. Yeah, it's that basic. Summon Rockfall. Perch of the Apex is too dramatic a name for this artifact. The passage of the Unbound villain is Virasan the Deceiver, also known as the Justiciar, which is his Kamen Rider-like alter ego and self-proclaimed hero and protector of Thafnir. With us is Tepeke, a Mikote from Shaktural whose father is the keeper of the perch and whose reputation and good name have taken a hit since the theft of the item. So Topeke wants to bring the item back and restore her father's good standing. Virasan talks a good game. He's in it for the people, and his name spreads as he saves many innocents from dangerous plant-like enemies, including Morbles. And as his star grows, so do the people begin to turn away and disregard the Radiant host, the actual protectors of Thavnair, clamoring for this new hero in their midst. Except, of course, the attacks were staged, and he even created some of the monsters, with special concoctions that alter the growth rate of the creatures. So a Morble seedling, instead of a little Audrey 2, is a big honking critter. Virasan is a wastrel rich kid, so useless that his father gives up on him and effectively just gives him an allowance as hopes he stays out of the way and doesn't bother anyone. But Virasan is enamored with the concept of heroes, but really doesn't want to put in all the effort that would take. So between the perch and his other methods, he cheats, and his goal is simply the adoration of the people. He turns them away from the Radiant host to the point where some even forget how much the guards of Thavnair did for them in the freaking final days. And why does he want this? So they come to depend only on him. It's all about vanity, and he can't get enough and even thinks, mistakenly, that we're a kindred spirit. But once he realizes we stand in his way, he pulls all the stops to, well, stop us, and it becomes clear that he has no issues with hurting innocent people. And anyone hurt by his use of the Apex artifact is just acceptable collateral damage. He goes off the deep end and declares himself the new king of Razarhan and demands the people worship him. They laugh and tell him to go away. After all, how can this moron compete with Ritra? But for all his bluster and ultimately the way he self-destructs, Virasan got very close to succeeding. Public opinion was already shifting and people were falling prey to the hero worship, which, considering Virasan's incompetence and his callousness, could only have spelled disaster for Thavnair. I mentioned that the physical range DPS in this one could be swapped. The way the Apex works is that it drops rocks near Virasan, around him, up to a certain radius. So I could envision you needing to run and gun with him, providing a good experience for a bard or machinist. On the other hand, overwhelming the shield of the Steelhawk vessel with magic sounds like a better way to deal with the shields than just shoot it more. And you know, magic doesn't seem to be the Alamegans' forte. They're primarily a martial people, which would have helped explain why they didn't just butcher that group of bandits. That leaves us with one final storyline, Melee DPS, which takes us to Kugane and Othard, following the Dreamweave Cocoon and its thief, Silvertongue Samidare. By far the best of the storylines, delivering on that darkness we sometimes expect from Final Fantasy XIV, but still having some nice moments of levity. We're told that our contact is Itoka, the best hunter of the village from where the Dreamweave Cocoon comes from, the artifact giving the user the ability to cast Dungeons & Dragons Ultra Self or Polymorph on themselves, to change not only their appearance, but their entire selves, so someone using it, and we see this happen, can turn into a bird and fly away. We work with Itoka, and she has these powder satchels to undo the effects of the cocoon, and with that we track down Samidare's latest ploys and undo them. And what is Samidare doing? How is this member of the Unbound fulfilling his ambitions? He's changing his shape and using new faces to incite conflict, to turn friend to foe, to turn ally to enemy, to attempt to spark wars anew. And why is he doing this? Because he loves it. To be precise, he's been broken to the point where his morality is completely skewed. Samidare was taken by the Garleans, just another man of Doma made to serve his enemies. His trading and missions were quite simple: to infiltrate other regions and destabilize them, cause internal strife, perhaps even ignite civil war, to weaken them for Garlean invasion. And along the way, for Samidare, it was no longer a job, it was his calling, and his perception of bonds and brotherhood and friendship became twisted, and he saw all those things as mere platitudes, ultimately fake and easy to undo. So even when he returned home, He couldn't go back to being a citizen of Doma. No. That wasn't him anymore. He had a job to fulfill, a philosophy to prove, to show everyone the truth of their relationships. He started in Doma, making neighbors turn against one another, and before his oldest friend, who we meet during the questline, could attempt to stop him or reason with him, Samidare got an invitation from the Passage of the Unbound, and he disappeared, heading for XRal. Samidare tries it all, escalating after every failure. He attempts to make samurai fight each other, then to create conflict between the Ruby Sea Pirates and Kugane, then pretends to be Hien to spark a war with Noxia, their neighboring nation. When none of that works, and with the Warrior of Light at his heels, he attempts to turn the people of the Azim Steppes against the Doman, and then tried the same with the other side, using the very visage of our character. It doesn't work, so he tries one last desperate move. Take the appearance of Sadhu and attempt to seduce the little son, who pretty much falls for it because it is Magnai. After all, mention his Nama and he's in. But with our help, he sees the truth and a fight breaks out. One Magnai doesn't take part in, being knocked unconscious before it kicks off. I mentioned our charge is Itoka, but that it's not exactly true. The person we're working with was supposed to be Itoka, the best hunter of the village, but she's dead by the time we arrive, and we meet Kuiki, who pretends to be Itoka with us until Samidare reveals her deception. Kuiki is not even a hunter at Itoka's level. She can't hit a target to save her life. She's a real stormtrooper. It's why back in her village, she was made to do more household chores to contribute, whereas a huntress, she simply couldn't. It was this frustration that led her to use the cocoon for herself, to turn into Itoka, and with that gain a measure of her skill, and that led to the events of the theft by Samidare. The elder of the village forgave Kuiki, but she couldn't forgive herself. So she traveled to Kugane and there met Itoka, and they decided to collaborate, until Samidare, using the face of Kuiki, got close enough to stab and kill Itoka. We also discover the reason why Kuiki can hit a target, and why when she turned into Itoka, she now could. It's not a lack of skill, but bad eyesight. So once we hook her up with some glasses, she starts nailing every target. Her aim is the primary reason Samidare escapes every time we confront him. So after the final battle, she pierces Samidare's left arm or wing as he attempts to fly away and is finally captured, the artifact reclaimed, and Itoka's death avenged. But the little bit that warmed my heart was the return. In every story so far, the return home has been joyful. The cast meets up with the people who sent you to find them, except for Loas and Ikwe, who made the trip herself, and they give you their thanks and go back whence they came. When you return to Shashepia, the person who sent you after Itoka, she's shocked to see Kuiki, who tells her the entire story, and still feeling guilty for inadvertently causing the whole thing, and feeling also guilty for Itoka's fate, she vows to exile herself, which Shashepia immediately rejects, telling her the forests are her home. Much to Kuiki's surprise, she had assumed in her distraught emotional state that she was unwanted, and we learned that when she disappeared, her entire village went out to look for her, checking every nook and cranny, terrified that the guilt and shame would make her do something drastic and harm herself. So Shashepia was overjoyed to see Kuiki in one piece, and tells her the best way to honor Itoka's memory is to go back and take her place in the village as their foremost hunter. After all, with her glasses, she now can more than fulfill the role. This ending was far more impactful for me than all the others. And it was a reminder that when we're down, we may not see our own worth, but it doesn't mean the people we love will agree with that sentiment. So if you're down and troubled, and you need a helping hand, I assure you, you got a friend somewhere who'll hold it tightly. Now, one thing that might seem clear when you're playing these quests is that the stakes are fairly low. At best, the Passage of the Unbound have a real shot at creating some conflicts across the land, but doing so seems almost accidental or incidental at times, with only Sholtefeed, Leofine, and Samidare having goals to destabilize nations. Eloreth and Virasan are in it for their own vanity, really. But I have a theory, and my feelings about the passage of the Unbound storyline will depend on whether this comes true or not. It's something we'll discover in months to come. But my theory is that these 5 culprits were meant to be stopped, that their entire thing was a setup, that the entire affair of the leader of the passage creating the organization in public was done on purpose, so that we are called to action, so that we're distracted by these events. But not only are the 5 or 6 Unbound pawns, but also test subjects. After all, they hold 5 relics of XRal withdrawal. No one said that those are the only ones that exist. So my guess is that the leader of the Unbound, Apyahi, is studying their uses of these artifacts, and may find the heartstring situation very interesting. That continued use and experimentation created effects that surpassed expectations. My theory is that all of this has been a ploy, and that the passage of the Unbound was always meant to fail, so that the real organization could learn from their actions and their mistakes, and perhaps even take a measure of the Warrior of Light and the different XRali warriors that went out to take the magical items back. And so when the time is right, they'll come out of the woodwork and maybe even become an organization we contend with for a long time to come. After all, we lost the Asians. We need a new shady group to take their place. But that's just my theory. We'll see if I've nailed it soon enough. I really hope that the final questline delivers. Otherwise, a lot of potential would have been wasted here. The other side of the job and quest divide belongs to the crafters and gatherers, and Dawntrail's deliveries following the set of Shadowbringers, where we help the owners of different businesses with demands of customers, along the way learning about them and why they're so passionate about their place of business. In Dawntrail, the deliveries are for Wachumekimeki Market, the artisan's corner for Tuliyola. Only many of its businesses are actually struggling to make ends meet to even attract customers, and that's where we step in. The Wachumekimeki deliveries remind me in part of the Anthropology Studium deliveries, where the questline is about the customs and cultures of the people around the world. So too are these deliveries about the people of XRal. There's a deep connection to the different tribes and nations and species that make up the people of Tuliyola. At the core of these deliverers, though, are the owners of the establishments, and the stories all have that measure of healing involved in them, be it a fisherman finally being vindicated on their belief that all creatures of the sea have value, or a widower finding out the truth of what truly happened to his lost family and thus gaining some closure. There's a deeply personal aspect to the Wachumekimeki deliveries that I really truly enjoy. But let me tell you about them, as not every delivery is rock solid. Speaking of rocks, let's start with Shunye's Apothecary. Shunye needs a miner or a botanist to help with the supply chain. Shunye is a Shatona man, and we learn they're supposed to travel from village to village, bringing news with them and fathering families along the way, so one Shatona can have a different set of children in each village they visit, and they roam around year long while the women stay behind and actually run the village and raise the kids. But Shunye lost his first family, and that's left him with a deep scar, so much that he moved to Tuliyola and just stayed there, refusing to start moving again. But he's not the only bunny man in this endeavor, as they're joined by a Viera, Uvlo, who hails from Eorzea and is from a culture that sends out their young to travel the land and learn as much as they can of other places to bring that knowledge back home. He's here to learn of the Shatona and XRal, and wishes to be in Shunye's employ as he feels it may be his best chance to fulfill his mission. After all, the deliveries, that supply chain, will likely have them travel the entirety of XRal, which works great for Uvlo. As the story progresses, and with the help of Shunye's sister, who wants her brother to move on, we get the Apothecary to open up, and we learn that some form of disaster wiped out his village. In the ruins, he found a peculiar crystal, one that we helped track down and discover, eventually, that it was a meteor, the same kind that fell over Shaktural and turned the Mamulja home into a blue jungle. So yeah, the big payoff of this story is, oh sorry buddy, big space rock fell from the sky and squashed your wife and children. That, sucks. But learning it does give him closure, and he has the answer of what actually happened. And a random celestial event is responsible for his loss. In the end, though he still has orders to fulfill and doesn't plan to close up the Apothecary, he thinks it may be time for him to start moving again. I suppose once you accept that a giant space rock can kill your loved ones at any point, you can maybe live life with a more carefree attitude. If it wasn't entirely obvious already, I didn't like this story or its resolution. The whole meteor thing felt a bit too random for my tastes. I would have made it some form of situation that could be ameliorated with the innovations that Kona is bringing to the table, and the problem is simply his village was way out in the boonies, and so those works haven't reached that far. It could be something as simple as the train tracks, that help could not get to them in time. That would connect the story to the ongoing XRal legacy and evolution kind of meta plot. Next up, let's round out the gathering jobs before we get to the Disciples of the Hand jobs. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but I can't seem to grasp it. Donuhanu has a problem. He's quite the fisherman, but he's a bit obsessed with the more unusual catches to be found in XRal's waters. The kind of fish that would normally serve as a boss or an enemy in a dungeon. Hard shells, razor teeth, saw-like fins, the works. Donuhanu feels fervently that these fishes are just as good as the trout, tunas, and salmons of the world. That's his mission, to raise awareness about these more unusual catches and things we can maybe lend a hand. Fortunately for him, there's a newcomer in town, Passionine, a Wallaki, aka a blue mage. He's got a particular set of skills, of the monster and creature variety, like other members of his tribe, but his are limited to fishes, and he's on a journey to find the weirdest, most powerful fishes he can to complete a rite of passage of his people that would have him test his skills against a variety of powerful monstrous foes. Sounds like he's got the right guy for the job. Nobody knows weird fish better than Donuhanu. Over the course of the story, Passionine describes a monster he's meant to face and its characteristics. Donuhanu thinks of the best fish to counter it, and we set off on the journey to find some samples. And the result is this relationship becomes almost symbiotic. Strengthening Passionine ends up bolstering Donuhanu's business in manners no one could expect. For you see, for Passionine to acquire the skills from the monstrous fish, he needs to eat them, and in doing so provides Donuhanu with new and interesting recipes that work with these creatures that in turn helps Donuhanu sell them to prospective buyers. His strange catch is no longer given the suspicious side-eye. This is a very positive, optimistic storyline. Even when during one of the latter quests the fish acquired is not fit for purpose, you find an alternative and keep going. The process creating this close friendship and partnership between Donuhanu and Passionine and making the fisheries incredibly popular. It's a delightfully cheery story and I was all for it. Not only that, but if you've ever wanted to get a bit more of that Blue Mage lore, this is the questline for you. It helps, of course, that with the amount of experience you get from fishing, you can easily level up a few times during these quests, so it's the one questline you could potentially do back to back, as the previous quest will involve enough fishing to get you to that next level requirement. Okay, now gatherers are done, time for the crafting folk. And we kick that off with a blacksmith, armor or goldsmith gig, Xeerol Metalwares, owned by Ral Sosh, a XRal blacksmith. Ral Sosh is more or less a bulk artisan. She focuses on quantity instead of quality. That's not to say her creations are bad, not by a mile, but her priority is in function over form. Her creations look basic, not much ornamentation. Good for her then that she has a brand new assistant, Papani, who's a former potsworn goldsmith and so completely unprepared for her new job. After all, potsworns are given everything and all the time they need to deliver their work. She's not used to procuring materials from the market or even delivering the orders with the speed and quantities required by Ral Sosh. This leads to a few issues in their relationship, with both becoming increasingly frustrated, and it culminates in Papani running away back to Earthenshire. Ral doesn't understand why she would just run away, but it turns out she has no idea how potsworns work. She once had the dream of being revered for her works, but when a moblin told her she needed to leave Tuliolal and go to Kosamauka to Earthenshire to improve her craft, she decided against it, abandoned her dream, and focused on the business as we've come to know it. But, wanting to know more about how Earthenshire, how that environment is like, you travel with her to Earthenshire, and this is one of those moments where our character becomes a mentor for others, telling these two artisans that they could really benefit from some teamwork, overcoming each other's weaknesses. Ral can make the basic structure, the functional part, and then Papani can take care of styling and other delicate work. In the end, they receive a commission from the palace itself, one that requires both their skills to deliver, and in doing so, they start a new era for Xeerol/Metalwares, where they can deliver quantity and quality. I like this story a lot. They're first shown their shortcomings, their failures, and then it shifts the tone to something a bit more positive, about working together to take the first steps to a new life for both. Their relationship goes from frustrated employer and employee to partners. Much like the fishery story, this is another quite delightful, cheery story. What I like the most is that it presents the different sides to craftspeople in Xeerol. In the MSQ, we focus on the potsworn and the incredible things they create. But this questline gives you a glimpse into the more mundane, day-to-day, I need a dozen tortilla presses for my taco stand kind of orders, and how important and valuable those are for the vast majority of people. If there is something this story is lacking on, and which it has in common with the mining and botany questline, is that it doesn't feel like your character is a key part of the business, more like you're helping pick up the slack or complementing the work of some other employee, in this case Papani. The rest of the stories, including the fisheries already mentioned, have that in common. You are a critical part of the business. Without you, it's not that it doesn't work as well, it just doesn't work at all. Case in point is the Alchemy and Culinarian delivery, Xeerolja Juicecraft, aka Mamulja Mbajuice. Xeerolja has a juice bar, and her ideal is using her extensive knowledge of the medicinal properties of plants, fruits, vegetables, and more in creating brews and concoctions made specifically for a given species of Tuliolal and provide tremendous health benefits, from something that gives moblins a lot of energy to a hangover cure for the Pelu Pelu. Xeerolja comes from a family of doctors, of healers, but she struggles with a massive inferiority complex given that she has no magic whatsoever. In her mind, it makes it impossible for her to follow in her father's footsteps. She's very much constantly putting herself down, especially whenever anyone brings up the fact that she is a healer, a different kind of one, but her creations are still providing a tangible benefit for her customers. What I mentioned before about being a critical part of the business is that Xeerolja has the knowledge of the different medicinal qualities and how they could help a group of people, but we are the ones who know how to cook or mix things for the best results and flavor. And then there's the third man in the operation, a nice moblin, rather taciturn at the start, whose role is to gather the ingredients in bulk. So Xeerolja comes up with the idea, we create the brew, and once we know what the ingredients are and their quantities, Alnaruk the Mobi goes and does his help hand task of finding stuff. In the end, not only does the business boom and her brews are celebrated, but we also help her get some confidence in herself, raise that self-esteem, and because mentoring is the name of the game, by the end she's learned enough to continue on her own, without us, and with Halnaruk now fully on board with the business, as excited about it as Xeerolja. But you know me, I love stories and cultures and exploring them in detail, and this last delivery questline is the one that, well, delivers on this in spades, and it's by far my favorite of the bunch. Epistles by Pameka. Pameka is working with a storyteller, a guy going around all of Xeerol, talking to different people and collecting their histories and traditional folktales and more, and the plan is for Pameka to put all of these stories down in writing, creating books. This is an innovative concept because reading and writing are still not that common in Xeerol. In fact, our storyteller friend, Semaweni, is still learning, We can't forget that XRal as a nation, with its own language and traditions, is still incredibly new compared to the others we've been to in past expansions. They've only recently decided on a script for their language, using the Eorzean alphabet for it. In fact, the story of how that came to pass, how they went with this known alphabet instead of creating their own script, is part of this story, and it's related to Pameka's grandfather and Gulul Jaja. As for what we're doing in this quest, well, we're creating books. And Sema when it comes around each time with a new tale from one of the different peoples of Tuliyollal, from how the Pelupelu discovered Mate tea, to how the Moblins came to Kosamauka and settled in Earthenshire. This questline is a treasure trove of world-building snippets. I love this so much. Gave me so much great XRal lore. Plus, with Pameka's family involved, it has that personal touch that I can really appreciate. If you have to pick one delivery to do, this is my pick. The deliveries overall are just wonderfully positive and in many ways help round out the world, the nation of Tuliyollal and its peoples. I look forward to the final questline that will combine them all. Having now gone through all the different storylines across these two completely different sets of secondary tales, the takeaway I have is that while the deliveries have a consistent tone to them and their well-crafted stories had overall left me satisfied with their individual conclusions and excited for how they'll all be combined in the end, the role quests instead have me waiting for that final questline to deliver the payoff, to hopefully make my desire for a twist come true, as without that we're left with stories with very little stakes and very inconsistent tone, along with an organization of villains about as competent as Hildebrand with none of the charm. But that's my opinion on the role quests and deliveries. Let me know in the comments what you think about them, and I'd love to know which one in your eyes reigns supreme. See you on the next one.